Oh yeah, here's a good one. What was the name of the extremely lifelike hologram that Riker nearly fell in love with? A. Viola. B. Concerto. C. Soprano. Or D. Minuet. How dare you?
Welcome to A Piece of the Action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
And I am Greg.
Today we're taking a look at Dune Imperium, and for those of you that were disappointed by our veer away from sci-fi in our last two reviews with Food Chain Magnate and Azul, we have come back home to what board games really truly are all about, which is sci-fi settings. And so we're going to get to hear what Greg and Eric think of Dune Imperium. This is a game says from 1 to 4 players, so I'm kind of curious to see what that means, how it plays one player, and 60 to 120 minutes runtime. So we're going to get into it, but before we do, just if you have not subscribed to us, go ahead and do that, as well as give us a like if you enjoyed the video. And let's go ahead and get into our introductory thoughts for Dune Imperium. So let's talk about Dune Imperium. Greg, you want to tell us a little bit about the premise and give us sort of a basic overview of the rules for Dune Imperium, please?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit of rules overview. I'll leave the theme to Eric because I mean, other than it's in the Dune universe, I'm actually not sure what this is trying to emulate. So I didn't pay attention to the theme on this one too much. But basically, I think the easiest way to describe this game is it's a worker placement smashed with a deck building game with a splash of area control. That's pretty much what the game is. So the worker placement side is pretty typical worker placement stuff. You put your worker out, you do the action, it's on the spot. It's typical type worker placement actions. You gain resources, you spend the resources in an effort to get victory points, which we're trying to get to 10 victory points. That triggers the end of the game. It has the most victory points, then wins. The other half of the game is the deck building side, which is, again, very typical deck building. You start with a deck of 10, you draw 5 each turn, you play all the cards. As you buy new cards, it goes to your discard pile. When you run out of cards, you shuffle your discard pile and have a new deck. So that's the basic other side. How they smash it together is when you play a card from your hand, it does the normal, has an action on it that you do. But in addition to it, there's symbols on the side of the card, 1 of 7. And there's 3 kind of main areas you can go to on the board, along with 4 guilds that you can go to. So those make 7 spots that you can go to. So you can only go to a spot when you play a card that has that matching symbol. So that's how they do that. And then the other kind of new thing, it's not really new, but it's unusual thing they do here is you only have enough cards. You only have enough workers to play a few cards that way. When you're done playing your workers, you have a reveal phase, and at the bottom of each card is another section that talks about what you get during the reveal phase. So it's not something you use as an action. It's just something you get at the very end of your turn. That's usually where you get the money. I forget what they call it here. Prestige or something.
Solaris.
No, it's what you use to buy the cards from the card row.
Oh, influence.
Influence. It's where you get your influence to buy the cards from the card row. Anyways, and there's a few other actions down there, but usually it's that. In addition to that, I did mention there's a splash of area control. There's actually a conflict section that happens. It's basically area control that's one area. So it's during the course of your play, you're putting cubes into this conflict zone.
Conflict zone ahead.
And every turn there's a card that's kind of flipped over that tells you what first place player will get there. Whoever has the most cubes here gets this stuff. Whoever second place gets this stuff. So there's kind of that fight each turn, each round where you're trying to possibly fight for that zone. And that's pretty much it. I mean, that's basically in a nutshell. Whoever gets to 10 points, like I said, that ends the game. If you're at 4 player, you start from 1 point. It's only 9 points that you need. And that's the rules, briefly.
It said on there the player count 1 to 4. Is there a 1 player variant of this?
Yeah, there's a
Eric
solo
could speak
variant.
to that.
Okay. All right. Well, Eric, you want to speak to that as well as maybe
Yeah,
a bit about
yeah.
the premise?
Sure. Yeah, the solo is a little different because you have. So I've noticed that there's always a couple of ways to do solo. In another solo game that I have, an Uwe Rosenberg game called Fields of Arl, that exemplifies one type of solo play where you're just trying to beat your high score. Like you play the game normally and you just try to get the high score. Another type of solo play is where there's a bot of some sort that you're fighting against.
So I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan.
And that's what Dune Imperium uses. So there is a deck that you just flip it over and it basically kind of gives the other players, the other automated players, points and resources kind of just at random from this deck that you then have to try to keep up with. It doesn't take turns like a player would, but it produces like an average amount of resources and victory points and things like that you have to try to keep up with as you play the game. It's really simple to implement. And it's actually used in both the solo and the two-player mode. So if you play two-player, you have to use the automated deck. I think they call it like House Hegel or something like that. It's a deck of cards that you just flip over every turn. So technically, I guess you could say this is a 3 or 4 player game with solo and two-player variants.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this is the first, Eric, other than your all-time favorite game, Star Trek Monopoly, right? I think this is the first time we've had a game where it is like completely and totally built on like an existing, fully fleshed out franchise in its own right. I can see you both.
I mean, Go with the drift racing is pretty. That's
pretty
thematic.
That's true. That's true. But other than that, I think so. And I know also, I don't know how Greg feels about it, but Eric, I mean, fair to say, I think you're a fan of the Dune books in general.
Yes, huge fan. I have a Dune rant prepared.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Before Eric gets into the theme, I want to say I actually am also a huge Dune. Well, I'm not huge, but I've always said that I thought Dune was one of the more underrepresented themes, IPs in board games, and I would like to see more games set in that universe.
Right.
But how it implements that, I'll leave to Eric, and maybe I'll have something to say on that too.
Yeah. Right. So that brings me to my question, which is that with all of, I don't know what you would call it, sort of expectation ahead of time of a pre-existing theme front-loaded in, does this game deliver on it? And do you think that having that ahead of time helped or hurt it? Or what do you? How do those two relate to each other?
Right. So this game is based on the upcoming Dune movie. So you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. It's not really representative of the books. It's ostensibly it's based in the Dune universe, but it's using like depictions of the actors like Timothée Chalamet and Drax the Destroyer. What's his name? Anyway,
Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista. It has got tons of really big. I'm actually really looking forward to the movie because it's going to be epic. I'm pretty sure. That having been said, does this game work with the theme? No, it does not. The Dune theme does not come through on this hardly at all. Don't believe the other reviews that say that it does. If you are a Dune fan, it does not. You are not going to feel like you're playing in the Dune universe when you play this game. It's got some. Maybe this is part of the movie. I don't know, but there's houses. So you've got the House Atreides, and you have House Harkonnen, and then there's two other houses that I am unfamiliar with. So maybe they're in the movie, but they're not from the books, and so just
Wait,
some
I
weird
thought
stuff
the,
there.
the other two are Ben Gesserit and Spacing Guild. I thought.
No. The houses that you can choose,
Oh,
not the
I see.
factions. The
Gotcha.
houses that you can choose. So you can choose to play House Atreides, you can choose to play House Harkonnen.
Oh, that
But
you
then
mean?
there's
Yeah,
two
yeah.
others that didn't make any sense. That didn't ring a bell to me. And I've read these books several times, so I don't think they're from the books. Also, if you're shooting for theme in Dune, if you want to play a Dune board game, I mean, obviously anybody who knows anything knows about the 1979 Avalon Hill game. That's where to go if you want to play a Dune game that feels like Dune. It's been reprinted here recently, probably because of the upcoming movie. That's supposed to be a great reprint of it. Or you could play Rex, which is a non-Dune IP related reprint of the game mechanics from the Avalon Hill 1979, set in the Twilight Imperium universe. But this game, no bueno on the Dune theme.
Did either of you ever play in the late 80s, early 90s or something, the Westwood Studios computer game Dune?
I did.
Oh,
yeah.
Dune 2? The Dune 2, right? The one that basically invented real-time strategy games?
Yeah, it was like a real-time strategy.
Was that it?
Yeah.
There was because it could be red, blue, or green. There was
by the sun here.
Yeah, there was a greenhouse that you get. I forget which one they were, because Harkonnen was red and Atreides was blue.
Yeah, yes, you're right. There was a house in there that was not canon either.
Okay. Okay, it wasn't.
I can't remember what it was.
All right. Well, so I guess two questions is it didn't feel like Dune. Why not? And also, what did it feel like then to play?
It didn't feel like an IP of any sort. It just felt like a worker placement deck building game. So yeah, it didn't feel like to feel like Dune. You have to have a particular type of player interaction that this game didn't fulfill on. You've got to have some betrayal. You have to have some intrigue,
more political intrigue. Yeah,
more political. That this game did not do that.
Okay, Greg, what about you as far as field of play goes?
Yeah, so the way it feels to play, and the reason why for me, other than there's some nods to the theme. You go to the Fremen to get the water and stuff like that, but it's. I could basically. This game to me feels like it belongs in a group of games that, in my mind, I call an efficiency Euro. That are very popular games. So when I play this game, it feels to me the feel of optimizing your turns, pretty much. And I know a lot of games are that way, but it's more tactical than that, I guess. For me, when I think of an efficiency Euro, I think here's a limited set of actions that you have to do on your turn. And the person that's going to win is the person that's best able to optimize their turn, find the most efficient route to get the most things, right? So that's kind of the wheelhouse this game falls into. I think there's a lot of games.
Which is where deck builders, that's where they where they shine.
I think deck builders in general are usually efficiency Euros, right? I mean, and I don't know that we reviewed one that I would consider a 100% efficiency Euro, maybe Terraforming Mars, size to a certain degree. But I think this is a really popular genre of games. I think Stefan Feld is like the king of what I consider the efficiency Euro. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what it feels like. It's optimizing and efficiency. It's not so much long-term strategy. It's just, are you able to work out the little details on your turn and find the little paths that get you one more Solari? So now I got this one more, which is the money in this game, one more dollar so that I can now do this on my same turn. And I get an extra action. Can you figure out that with the set options that I have on this turn, can I find that optimal path to get me the most stuff? So that's how it feels to me. And none of that really is Dune-ish to me. I don't remember them optimizing turns so much in the books, but that's how it feels.
Okay. Well, now let's talk a little bit about some of the priorities and strategies you might want to think about playing a game of Dune Imperium, and to start with that, let's go to Greg.
So, as with most efficiency Euros, I think it's a very opportunistic game. I think that's the best strategy. Is yes, you can have a kind of a general plan or a certain type of engine that you're building up, or a certain type of a path that you're trying to set forth for yourself. You're putting your deck together in a certain way, but there are certain opportunities you have to keep an eye out. For example, if spice is piling up, because it's got that whole Uwe Rosenberg style, every turn spice gets added to the ones that it didn't get to. If there's a whole bunch of spice piling up and you get it cheap, go for it. If conflict looks like no one's going to the conflict spot, and you can get the number 1 or number 2 spot cheaply with only 1 or 2 cubes, I say go for it. So I do believe there is certain paths you can follow, but do look for those little opportunities. The second one, for me anyways, is this game only goes to 10 points. So points here are pretty hard to get. And in a 4-player game, you only got 9 points you got to get. So you can do some pretty quick calculations on the board to figure out which is the most efficient way to get a victory point. Like, how many Solari equals a victory point? Like, you can, the math in this game is pretty straightforward, I think. But in my mind, bang for buck, I think those guild tracks, those guild tracks are where you should always get points. Because, so the way the guild tracks work are, there's a couple, 2 spots in each of them that you can go to, and they have an action on top of it that you get for going there. But in addition, if you go to one of their spots, you move up their track. And if you ever get to 2 influence on their track, you just immediately get a victory point. So you're still getting the action, but you're also, so let's say, for example, there's a spot on the board, a regular spot. It's like 3 Solari you can get. Well, there's one in the guild track you can go to, gives you 2 Solari, but you get a bump up on that track. Think of that as 2 Solari plus a half of VP. That's really efficient. That's really efficient. So in my mind, I always think, all right, 4 of my victory points are coming from these guild tracks. That's almost half your points. 4 of my victory points are coming from these guild tracks. So I always try to build my deck around, because the thing about the guild spots is the symbols are a little rarer, but you can build your deck around that. So I always try to focus on, no matter what else I'm doing, trying to get the spots to go to the guild tracks, because in my mind, those 4 points are the easiest to get and the most cost effective. Beyond that, I mean, I think it's just learning the cards, which cards are very effective. I don't know if this is true or just my experience. I don't have a ton of experience with this game, but I found the opulence card to be like amazing.
OP.
I don't know if it's OP. Maybe you guys are just bad.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, in my notes, I was like, it's either OP or I'm inept.
Well, I actually looked it up, and I kind of looked up on this card to see if like anyone else was complaining about it being overpowered. No one else was really saying anything about it, but it just seemed really powerful to me. Like, you get, basically every time it comes up, you can spend $6, 6 Solari to get a victory point. And that seems pretty good to me. But anyways, I'm sure there's other cards in there that are also more effective than others. I think learning, like all deck building games, learning the deck, what's available out there would be effective strategy if you want to get good at it.
I would say that once that pops up though that card is buyable, seriously consider it.
I
had some good success with it, so yeah. I liked it.
Let me ask you this: since there's only 10 victory points, I feel like, and again, tell me if you think I'm off base here, but it seems like a lot of times when they have sort of a victory point track that everybody, with a finish line at the end of it, that those games have a tendency to be able to end faster than people think they will. That, you think, oh, you're 3 or 4 points away, but you don't realize that they've been building an engine that all of a sudden is going to click into gear. And, does it have that feature to it? Or
I know what you're talking about. I don't think there's some of that.
Scythe does that. Where you spend half the game and then nobody's getting any victory points, and all of a sudden, boom, your engine kicks in. Boom. And I don't think this one does that much.
Yeah, I think the points are hard enough to get that you can. I think a lot of that is people they're like preparing to get a point, and they have a lot of places where they're like one move away from doing it, and then in the last turn they just do it all at once. Mm-hmm. I think you can do that a little bit in this game, but you actually don't get a lot of actions on your turn in this game. You get 2, maybe 3 worker placement spots. So I don't know that you have time to pull off some grand 5 points finale. Right. I mean, I think I did one turn where I had like 3 in the same turn or something like that. So it can happen. but I don't think it'll come out of the blue. I think you can kind of watch and see where people are.
Okay, not as much as some others might then. Okay. All right, Eric, what about you? Strategies and priorities for Dune Imperium.
Yeah, the working on the guilds is the best way to get victory points. However, you also need to pay attention to the combats that show up, because especially some of the later battles, they're going to give you 2 victory points if you succeed at that battle. So I would say priority number 1 is increase in the 4 guilds and get those victory points. But a close second is if there's a VP reward from the combat, then on that turn, or on that phase, I should say, focus on winning that combat, because a lot of times that's a good way to go. Even if you're not in first place, there's usually a benefit to be had from fighting in the conflict. So there's that. I would also say work on card synergy. There are families of cards, like based on the different factions. So there are Bene Gesserit cards, and there are Emperor cards, and things like that tend to work well together. So when you're purchasing cards, remember the cards that you've already purchased, and work on getting more of that type. I would say 2 things that seem like they would be good strategies, but I don't think that they are in this particular game, is getting your 3rd worker. In most worker placement games, that's a number 1 priority. I don't think so in this game. I think you can. I don't think you need to rush that. If it happens that you have a lot of extra Solari and can afford him, sure, go for it.
Is it just is it just because you have nothing to do with him?
Yeah, I think that the time that it takes to get him, you only got 10 victory points. So the time that it takes to get all the money, I think it costs 8 Solari to get your Swordmaster, your 3rd worker. Yeah. It's a little spendy. So, and all it does is let you go to one other place. I don't know. I think there's other workarounds for that.
That's an interesting point. I want to kind of talk on that too. Actually, kind of reminded me of something else. But I think because also with your 3rd, your Swordmaster, you also have to play a card out of your hand to play him. And because of that, I talk about the reveal phase. So you reveal all the cards that you haven't played, and that gives you the influence you need to buy new cards. But if you're playing a 3rd card, that means you also have less influences then. So you don't always want to play him. Sometimes you want that influence. And I do agree with Eric, and this is kind of getting into the good stuff, but I do think that's a more interesting decision than usual in worker placement. Because usually that's obviously the thing you want to do, get more workers. But here I think it's definitely it's not definite. It's just something to think about. However, it did remind me of something else. The spot I do think is something I almost always went for, and I think is worth it, especially in the early game, was that spot that gives you the 2 extra Solari, 2 extra influence every single turn.
That's
because you can buy those.
Yeah.
I like that spot, and I almost always go for that in the beginning. Again, I'm not a great player, so I don't know if that's like someone's going to frown on that, but I thought that was a great spot.
Yeah, there are several spots on the board that once you've done them, you just I shouldn't say several spots. That particular spot gives you 2 extra influence every turn. So why not go for it? It's actually not that expensive to get there. But yeah, on the games that I've played, I rushed my 3rd worker, and in the late game, I found that I didn't want to use him. I wanted to use those cards for other things instead of sending my worker somewhere. So it ended up being a waste. So maybe not get your 3rd worker if it's going to be too expensive. The other thing that seems like a good strategy that might not be is card thinning. I found that the deck stayed pretty small in this game. So thinning your deck isn't. There were a couple of hands where I was like, this is kind of a sucky hand. But again, is it worth it for me to spend a whole turn sending one of my agents to the Bene Gesserit so it can thin your deck? Typically, in a deck building game, deck thinning is one of the top priorities, so one of the top strategies. I didn't think that was the case in this game. So I would say focus on increasing in your influence with the guilds or your affiliation with the guilds. Focus on winning battles that have victory point rewards, and get a deck that has a lot of card synergy.
Okay. Okay, now that we've talked about priorities and strategies, let's move on to talk about the good and the bad. What did Dune Imperium do well? What could it have done better? Eric, let's start with you. Tell us what you liked about Dune Imperium.
Because it's a mashup, because it's a hybrid, I think that it has a deeper level of strategy or maybe like advanced tactics. I don't think this is a terribly strategic game, but there's just so many choices on your turn that it felt like every turn was a fulfilling puzzle to solve. Every turn was like, how can I optimize this so that I can get that VP but also win the combat over here? Can it be done? That was fulfilling. Also, not a terribly AP analysis paralysis kind of game because everything's pretty transparent. Everything is pretty easy to comprehend and understand on the boards. So like you can get some nice tactics per turn pretty quickly. So that's pretty fulfilling. I liked that. Also that addition of the two types, the worker placement and the deck building, it actually felt really natural to me. It didn't feel forced or tacked on. I really like the way that mechanic worked together, where you have to play cards out of your hand in order to send your workers there. But do you want to? Because in the end, you're going to play your hand down like in a typical card deck builder game, and that opens up a lot of hard choices. Also, I feel like this game had a pretty high level of interaction compared to most deck builders. You played Dominion, kind of solo-y, kind of multiplayer solitaire. But this one, and even maybe a little bit more interaction than many worker placements that I've played. I think mostly this game is a race. So the interaction that you're having is am I ahead in the race or not? Are you racing up the faction allegiances or racing to get more military? And interestingly, I am not typically a fan of that kind of interaction. But in this game, I didn't mind it. I actually really liked it, because seeing what all the factors in play are is pretty simple and intuitive. And also because of the scarcity of points, it makes that really tense. You only go into 10, so that race is very important. The multiple races that you're having to win is quite important and quite tangible. It's very understandable. So I thought that because of all those things, this had a higher level of player interaction than I expected. A lot of that is also tied into a very, very easy to understand board. The board iconography on it is extremely, extremely simple. And it's a really good solo experience. The setup is a cinch. I like the way that the solo player deck works. It's very simple to implement and has several layers of challenge to it. And so as a solo experience, it's high up there for me.
Okay. Do you feel like it would? Do you feel like it would be worth getting, even if your main goal was to play it solo? Would it be worth it?
I do, actually. Yeah, I do. I don't think it's as fulfilling a solo as say High Frontier for All, but it's a very different type of solo. It is High Frontier for All is that toy box kind of feel, whereas this one is just a real nice, simple, quick challenge, like a kind of the High Frontier for All is less of a standard experience, whereas this is a more standard solo experience, and I would recommend it to people who are playing solo only.
Okay, cool. All right, Greg, let's hear what you liked about it, and I am curious now because interaction and not having enough interaction is a lot of times a big issue for you. So I'm kind of curious if you felt the way Eric did in terms of levels of interaction, but beyond that, what do you think it did well?
Yeah, so that's something I'll bring up. Both sides, good and bad. But the good of this game for me was, to me, this is a very smooth, highly polished, well-oiled machine. If you like that kind of a game where just everything clicks. I agree with Eric. The board was easy to read. It does present you with a lot of choices. It's not overwhelming. It's easy to teach. I think people can click pretty easily with what's going on in this game. So for that reason, I think this works well with a lot of groups. And it doesn't stay too long. I do like that. It feels quick. I tend to prefer games when I look at a board and I go, oh, it only has 10 BP. That automatically kind of piques my interest a little bit, because that makes me know that the points are going to be a little tighter to get. So it does have that. I enjoy that. And yeah, with interaction, I do want to give a special shout out to that conflict space. It's a very simple thing. You're just trying to you just win that spot by putting more cubes than everybody else. But I found that, for me anyways, to be the most interesting part of the game. And that is where all the interaction is coming from in this game, most of it. Because it makes some really interesting decisions. It kind of reminds me, actually a little bit, and I think this is more interesting, but it does remind me a little bit of the military in Seven Wonders. Because it's that whole same thing of how much resources am I willing to devote to this? But if you don't win the battle, and like if you play 4-player, if you get last place, or any third place, actually 3-player too, if you get last place in that battle, you get nothing. So we had a lot of games where we would start putting in a ton of resources, a ton of cubes into that spot. And then it's like, at what point do you just decide to, like, I'm not going to win this, and you just cut ties? And just that whole loss aversion kind of like kicks in. It's like,
an arms race meets the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you just like, I put so much into this already. I don't know. I just found that to be a very interesting decision space there. How much are other people willing to go there? How cheap can I get it? Is it worth this? I don't know. I just find that to be an interesting spot. And because the the rewards are different every single turn, and they ramp up over the game. And by the end, 2 VP there. That's a huge point. It's a huge amount of points in this game. But sometimes it's not amazing. But then people start ignoring it, and you're like, can I get this for 1 cube? That's worth it, So it's, I don't know. I just I liked the conflict space. That is the kind of interaction I do enjoy in a game. So.
There's also an interesting thing that happens with intrigue cards, which we haven't talked about yet. But intrigue cards are a special hidden. They're a little bit of hidden information that can totally swing a combat. I went up against Courtney actually, and I was totally going to waste her on military, but then I realized after the fact that she had like 4 intrigue cards in her hand, and I was like, it's because there's so many of the intrigue cards grant massive military bonuses, and of course she creamed me. But yeah, that's another interesting thing to factor in.
All right, now let's go to the other side of the coin. What did you not like about Dune Imperium, Greg?
The bad part of this game. So, a lot of times I like to use beer analogies. That's kind of my go-to source of analogies.
Right.
But today I'm going to go with wine for a specific reason. So beer is something I'm generally familiar with, and I can taste the difference between beers. But wine is something, while I enjoy, I wouldn't say I'm as well versed on. And so when I hear like people are really wine enthusiasts, and they say something like, "Oh man, the tannins are so much better in the 2016 than the 2015." Like, I can't taste the difference. Like, my palate is not that sophisticated in the field of wine for me to tell the difference. I know I'm a common man. So, but what that reminds me of in this game is when people talk about efficiency euros, which is a huge category that people love. But when people say, "Oh man, this efficiency euro, it has the deck building built in. Oh, this one you can actually use a rondel in a certain way that, like, with a dice, it's amazing." To me, those are all like slightly different flavors of kind of the same thing. So these efficiency euros, in my mind, I enjoy them, but there's nothing any one of them is really doing to stand out from the others that makes me go, wow, yeah, this is so much better. So while I can say in this game, yeah, it feels smoother, I do like the conflict spot. There's some nice things about it. I don't know what makes this thing stand out over, say, what we reviewed, Terraforming Mars or Scythe. I mean, to me, those are all kind of the same pocket to me, and they're all equally enjoyable, but not amazing. So that's where it is for me. All right, but some specifics about this game. Let's talk about the randomness a little bit. So the deck has randomness, of course, which in deck buildings you expect that. And I'm not so opposed to it in this game either, but I do want to mention it because what's most deck builders, it's about mitigating that. Like you're trying to make the probabilities better so that you can draw a good hand. But to me, this game never seems to let you. I would say you go through your deck 4-5 times. And thinning, Eric mentioned this before, I find thinning in this game to be not a big thing and a little too pricey. So I never felt like my deck, I never had enough goes at my deck to get that probability worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I can just go, hey, I lost that game, but that's because that was the way I built the deck. But I just think you could do whatever you can in this game and still just draw bad cards because you just didn't have a chance to get the deck to a point where you could get good hands.
Because your sample size of what you take out of your own deck is so small.
Yeah, what you take out, and plus you don't get that many passes. So 4 or 5. So this is super minor. This didn't bother me so much, but there are some times where you're just going to draw 5 cards on your turn and be like, wow, this is exactly what I didn't want to draw. And I don't think that's 100% your fault. I think sometimes that's just the way the deck came up. So you got to be cool with that. The randomness though I do want to talk about, and the one I do have a problem with, actually, Eric mentioned them, the intrigue cards. I find those intrigue cards to be super swingy, and they're not equal. Some are amazing and some are bad. And he talked about it like with the conflict. You can spend all this time and resources to get your cubes in there, and then someone just happens to have an intrigue card that just like, oh, I got this card that I just drew. Boom, I win. And it's like, wow, I just spent my whole turn fighting that. Thank you. So it starts to feel a little take that-ish in that way. And I don't know. And some cards are like, Courtney had one that, like, this gives you 2 VP at the end of the game if you have certain levels in the guild track or something. It just seems big. And I'm like, I got one. Oh, this one gives me 1 water. Oh, okay. I don't know. Yeah. And that's the thing, too, is they're very situational. So sometimes you get a card that's like, oh, this is exactly what I need. And sometimes you get one like, I will never use this card. So I found them to be really swingy. And I do felt they kind of took a little bit out of this game for me. I kind of thought about this. If I were to play this game again, I probably would. I enjoy it. I think I'd prefer the intrigue cards to be drawn and then put face up in front of the players. And I wonder how that would change the dynamic. Because I would be much more comfortable if I knew what could happen. Like, okay, is she willing to play that intrigue card? Now it's a decision. It's not just something out of the blue.
That'd be an interesting tweak. I wonder if we could do it kind of like, remember how they did Gandalf cards in the old Lord of the Rings board game where they were all laid out visibly and you could just choose to buy them, and so you know what a player has? That would be an interesting house rule.
Well, that would be even more if you could choose which intrigue card you wanted. I think that would make them a little overpowered if you could choose which one you want. You would definitely try to get intrigue cards because there's some good ones in there. But I think if they were just random, but you just knew what they had, it would feel less take that to me. Because the problem I have is like, oh no, you can't because I got this card that I just happened to draw, and that's not interesting to me. Okay, so I did not like the intrigue cards. Okay, and the last part, interaction. I said I was going to come back to that. I do like this game in that the conflict spot does have more interaction than the usual type of game like this. But that's about it. I don't consider races to be interaction. So that's okay. And then the worker play. People always call this game tight. That's like one of the first things you hear people say about this game. It's tight. But I didn't find that on the worker placement side. There was never a point. For me, a tight worker placement is when I want to go to 3 spots at the same time, and if anyone takes one of those spots, my whole plan is going to just crumble. There was never a point where someone took a spot on the board and I just wanted to flip the table. That to me is a sign of a tight worker placement. I know, even if people took a spot I kind of wanted to go to, I'm like, well, there's another good spot over here. I'll go to this one. So I don't even find that the worker placement side was that tight or interactive. It's that conflict spot. That's the interaction. There's a little bit of choice denial on the board and with the cards that you buy. But it's a little more than usual, but it's still not as much as I like. So that's going to be in the negative. And finally, just to kind of sum up why I'm not super high on these types of games, I always feel like these strategies are a little bit baked into the board. I talked about in Food Chain Magnate how I like that game because it had very emergent qualities. A lot of these kind of modern games, I feel like the strategies are just kind of baked in, and you just got to figure out what they are and then do them the most efficiently. So that's not as interesting to me either. I feel like those games typically have a limited lifespan. Once you go through all the strategies, well, I've seen everything this game has to offer, and I think it requires player interaction to reintroduce new life into a game. But yeah, that's where I stand on the game.
Okay. All right. Eric, what about you? What do you think it could have done better?
A few things. I think that there's possibly some balance issues. We mentioned Greg's opulence card. There's another couple cards in there. There's the Kwisatz Haderach card, which I felt was really strong. If used correctly, it lets you take one of your workers that you've already played and then place them anywhere on the board, even if that place is occupied. Just like you get another, it's like having an extra worker, but that worker is even more powerful, and you don't have to pay for the extra worker. So there's some balance there, issues there. I also agree that I think the intrigue cards, while intriguing, are too powerful. They are too swingy. So there's some issues there with that. I'm eventually going to give it a 1 on the high five factor, but I think that it barely gets there. It barely gets to a 1. Your experience playing this game might be drastically different. It might take you several games or never before you feel that kind of huzzah moment. I only got there once out of all the times I played, and it felt good, but I think it's rare that you're going to get that high five kind of feeling from this. A little bit of ranty time for Eric. First off, the lack of theme in this was really disappointing. Because I love Dune, and I am a huge fan of the Dune books, and I don't mean the crappy Brian Herbert books. I mean Frank Herbert, and I don't mean the movies. I mean Dune. By the way, if you are a fan of Dune, if you think you're a fan of Dune, but you've only read the first book, how dare you?
Yeah.
You need to read the rest of the books, and here's why. Frank Herbert, when he wrote Dune, he wrote it intending to tell a story about the perils of giving over too much power to a charismatic leader. Okay? That only shows up in Dune Messiah, the second book. Dune, the book that everybody is like, I love Dune. Dune is great. They've only ever read the first book. They've read the prequel to the story that Frank Herbert wanted to tell. So so check yourself, supposed Dune fans. But there's so much joy to be had from the Dune universe that this game did not fulfill on. That was a major disappointment to me. What it did fulfill on was various shades of brown. So if you are someone who loves the color brown, then you should get this board game, because there is a multitudinous variety of browns on this extremely boring board. So I mentioned before that one of the good things was the clarity of the board. That cuts both ways, because what you end up getting with clarity, and there's no fuss, no muss on this board, but there's also no interest whatsoever. The art on this board is non-existent. It's really, really dull to look at. Greg's not going to mention it because he doesn't care about that kind of thing.
I really apprecited how they matched up the burnt umber with the smoky topaz. I mean, yes. That to me was brilliant.
Right, because Greg is a fan of Brown, the board game. But so the art on this is weak sauce. Which impacts my ability to put theme into it from my imagination. There's nothing Dune-y about the art or the board or even the color scheme.
That feels like a real missed opportunity coming to the table with all that IP ahead of time, right? I mean,
That's right.
How many awesome epic Dune works of art have been done, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you could really have gone over the top with some of the Dune art in this, but this is just like really, really boring. So because of that, it was very difficult for me to try to imagine myself playing in the Dune universe, which is what this game requires, because you're not going to get the feeling of Dune from the mechanics of the board game, because it doesn't include any of that necessary deception or betrayal or things that are inherent in the Dune universe. So those are my bads.
Okay, let's go now to our final thoughts on Dune Imperium. What do you guys rate it? Would you recommend it? Anything else you want to say about it? And does it go on our shelf? Let's start with Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of said it already. It's an efficiency Euro in my mind, which I kind of categorize those all the same place. Those will always be around a 7 for me. Those are just kind of where they live, which means I enjoy them. I can have fun with them, but they'll never be the kind of games that I seek out when I want to play a board game. But I enjoy the puzzle that it gives you. So yeah, it's a 7. It's good. It's fun, but it just kind of gets, to me anyways, it gets lost in all the other efficiency heroes out there, and there's hundreds of these coming out every year. I just don't know that's doing anything for me to stand above the crowd, except for maybe that little conflict area, but that's not, it's kind of faint praise, I think, for it. So there you go. That's where I'm at, a 7. Does it go on the shelf? I don't, judging from Eric's bad side, maybe not, because I was going to suggest Scythe, because I think I do like this a little better than Scythe, just a little, just because I think it plays faster than Scythe. To me, Scythe just goes on too long sometimes. I just find this to be a little bit more.
I need to educate you on Scythe. You do not seem to understand that game. That is a beautiful, well-designed, deep game.
No, I think it's a well-designed game. It just goes on too long sometimes, I think.
If we got rid of Scythe, Eric would have to throw away all of his Scythe bling.
Yeah, I know. That's why I thought maybe if he liked the similar amounts, I would suggest that, but it doesn't sound like he does. So we'll see what he says. But that's I'm fine keeping Scythe, because like I said, it's a half a point difference. I think I gave Scythe a 6.5. So it's not like I love this so much more than Scythe. I want to force it on. But I was just thinking, our shelf is in a position right now. That's the only game I'd be willing to let go for it, because I think the other games on the shelf are better. So, yeah.
Okay, Eric, what about you?
Well, bear in mind that my big rant there that I just gave in the bad was more generalized about Dune itself and the color brown, and less about this game. I actually think this game, the mechanics are nice. I like them. I give this game a 6.5, which is high for me. This is a fun game. And honestly, although I haven't talked about it much, I think where this game shines is in the introductory level game. I think that this is a great game to introduce to people if they are interested in something that plays quickly and light. They don't have a lot of experience with board games, but they want to dip their toes into both worker placement and deck construction. That it just left me. Deck building. Yes, thank you. This covers both of those, and it does a good job with it. It's fun. It's not a Dune game, but it is a great worker placement / deck building game. So for that, I think it does a good job. It's a great intro level hybrid game. So my takeaway on this would be, don't get this game because of Dune, but get it because you like deck builders or worker placements and or simple, solid gameplay style games. I would keep it, but I'm not going to like it. I don't like it more than Scythe. I was going to suggest Seven Wonders Duel, actually. I think that though Seven Wonders Duel is a good 2-player only, I actually like this game as a solo game and a 2-player game. And it has more legs on it than Seven Wonders Duel does. So I don't know. I was going to throw that out there.
That's actually an interesting thing to bring up. Because Seven Wonders Duel is another one I'd be okay probably letting go. I think I gave that a 7. No, I gave that less. I don't know what I gave that. I think I gave that around a 7 too. The only thing with Seven Wonders Duel is it is a 2-player game, But I guess if this game works just as well, too. The other thing is 7 Wonders Duel is short, which I kind of enjoy having on the shelf. But I don't know. I'm kind of
that. 7 Wonders Duel is short. It is shorter than this, but
we don't have a lot of short games on our shelf.
No, we don't. But I
Which
mean, we're
I kinda
not really
wanna-
into those.
That's true. We're not. It'd be nice to have a couple, though, probably at some point. But it is tight. I don't know. You know what? I think I am ambivalent enough about that. I'm going to leave that up to you. If you want to kick off 7 Wonders Duel, I'm down with that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's close, but I think this game has more potential to make it to the table than 7 Wonders Duel does. I love 7 Wonders Duel, but this can be played as a nice 2-player game, and it can be played 3 and 4 players and solo. Yeah. So I don't know.
And we have 2-player. We have Go. We have Go. It's 2-player. And Crew is short.
You can play 9x9 Go quite quickly.
That's true. Yeah. I think I like that decision. Sure.
Okay.
I'll kick off 7 Wonders Duel.
All right. Well, so goodbye, 7 Wonders Duel. Hello, Dune Imperium. And seems like kicking stuff off our shelf is getting more and more rare these days.
It's getting more difficult for sure.
Much harder.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I like 7 Wonders Duel. I mean, we're kicking off games that I enjoy, so that's a good sign.
Getting more painful. So, okay, very good. Guys, what are we going to play next time?
Next time we're playing Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan.
Okay, great.
Our first real war game.
Okay, very nice. Not that fake war game.
So as to not to give a nod to all the real grognards out there, it is a block war game. So it's not chits on a map thing. If anybody is watching this, it is like only chits on a map counts as war games. This is a block war game, but it's still a war game.
I think if you don't consider block war games a war game, your definition of war game is a little too fine.
You're in too deep. You've drunk the Kool-Aid.
No, it's a block war game, but I think that falls squarely in the war game category. So we'll take a look at it.
Okay. All right. Very good. So look forward to Sekigahara next time. In the meantime, if you do not consider block war games to be real war games, and you read Dune and then skipped Dune Messiah to go straight to the Brian Herbert Dune books, and you want to tell Greg and Eric how wrong they are about all of that stuff, then leave us a comment below and subscribe to us. By the way, if you love hearing these conversations, but you hate looking at the terribly ugly faces of Greg and Eric, you can also...
Understandable.
Yeah, very understandable. You can also listen to us on our podcast, which I believe is available pretty much everywhere. We just put this same thing out in podcast format, and you can get it on Google, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, all of those regular places. So,
however, you would miss the guest cameos of our pets.
That's right. That's right. So,
of which
there's something to be said
in this episode.
Yeah. So little Easter eggs there for the real fans. Okay. And in the meantime, be aware Eric is doing his own thing over in his Collect My Thoughts series, where he's talking about the topics that are of interest to him, and Greg is doing the same thing with his Ars Ludica series, where he is talking right now about the schools of board game design. So stay tuned for those. Between those and these regular reviews, we have something now coming out just about every week. So give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe if you can. And until then, this has been a Piece of the Action.
That's funny choices there, but I believe it's Minuet. That's what I'm remembering.
Micah?
Yeah, I have no memory of this.
Really? This was. Do you remember the episode? This was the 0011110001.
Yeah, the binars. Yes.
And it was so funny because they had to hijack the Enterprise because the Enterprise had the only computer large enough to temporarily house their AI that ran their planet while they did necessary modifications, upgrades to it.
Or something.
Yeah, no, so wasn't it?
You'd think that there'd be something that they could. I don't know. Maybe they explained it.
Wasn't there something with this episode too? Like this was supposed to be the explanation as to why the Enterprise's holodecks were so amazing, because the binars
That's interesting. I don't remember that. That would be an interesting.
But I believe it got filmed out of order, and I think The Big Goodbye came before this, so it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Because you remember in The Big Goodbye, when they did the first holodeck episode, they went in and they were talking about how amazing and realistic everything was, and it was blowing their minds, and it was the first of its kind. But I thought their original intention was the binaries were to come in and soup up their holodeck, and now they would have like a super holodeck. But they never touched on that ever again. So,
well, and nowadays, like it's obviously not the first of its kind anymore. If you are treating Discovery as canon, they've got holograms all over the place.
I don't. So no.
Neither do I.
Sorry for you Discovery fans, but I don't.
And neither should you.
The only thing that reminds me of is the episode with Geordi where with Leia Brahms, right? Where she shows up and then found her own hologram model and was awkward.
It recreated her perfectly from her like Starfleet records.
Yeah,
personality and everything.
Frustrated as an actor. I forgot his name. It's been a long time.
LeVar Burton.
LeVar Burton, yeah. In interviews, he was always so frustrated that he never got a romance arc, except for that one of those 2 episodes. He described himself as like the asexual engineer, even Data got some romance.
Right.
Yeah. So, what was I gonna say? Micah, what's your guess here?
Okay. Well, usually we do this and I go different than Greg, just to be different, but Greg's usually right. Mm-hmm. So my record ends up being very bad. Worse, if my record ends up being worse than the 25% it normally would be, because I'm deliberately avoiding what's probably the right answer. But I will do that strategy nonetheless and say, I don't know, Viola.
All right, Viola. Well, your theory was correct, Micah, because Greg is correct. It is D, Minuet.
You knew that, Eric, right?
I did, yes. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you're happy.